Art Museum for this very special evening. Before I do the introduction, I want to acknowledge a few very important people in the room, contributing significantly to the university's growth as well as to the arts and FIU. First and foremost, I want to introduce our provost, Dr. Wartzoff. Also, Dr. Wertheimer. Does everybody know who Dr. Wertheimer is? His commitment and dedication, appreciation of this university is unparalleled. I'm sure I speak for everybody in this room. Thank you for all that you've done for this university. Not just the College of Medicine and Nursing, but remind everyone that we started with the School of Music and the Wertheimer Performing Arts Center. And we're very, very appreciative. In the 40-plus years the university has been accepting students, the arts have gone from being on the fringe of the campus to filling basic general ed requirements, to being seen as something that were nice to have, but every university probably should have them, to becoming part of the solution center that the university has become, to integrating themselves into the community, to becoming preeminent in higher education, and understanding the interdisciplinarity of the arts. And there's a few individuals who have been pillars of that transformation. And two of them you're going to get a chance to speak to with this evening. And one is Dr. Carol Bainey. You cannot imagine, you cannot even say the arts and FIU in the same sentence without having Dr. Davies' name in that sentence. She has completely transformed not just art and art history, but the way the arts are viewed in this community, and we are very grateful for that. The other individual I have the pleasure of introducing is Fred Compton. Fred is the former founding director of the FIU School of Music. He is the university's first composer in residence and the winner of awards from the Fulbright, Rockefeller, and Guggenheim Foundation, as well as the National Endowment of the Arts. He is the composer of over 135 internationally performed compositions, including the recently released recording Guernica Piano Concerto. The next sentence is extremely important, which has recently been submitted for a 2014 Grammy nomination. Most important to me is he's probably one of the nicest people to meet. He's a very close friend and mentor. It's my pleasure to introduce Michael Compton.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be here and to see so many friends. The one person we didn't introduce and should be introduced is some person who took my job, Orlando Garcia, who's now in charge of the School of Music. Where is he? There he is. Why does one write a composition? A composition in general. I'm going to talk off. I don't have prepared notes, and I do better this way. In any case, why does one take on new compositions? You heard him say I've written over 135 works, and they run the gambit in sounds from orchestral works to concertos to chamber music to jazz works to you name it. And I've experimented and tried many things over the years. What motivates an individual to write a work? Well, sometimes it's a commission. It's quite simple. You're getting paid for it. You write it. Other times you're writing something for a friend. Sometimes you're inspired to write something. And sometimes it's something you feel you have to do. Guernica is something that has sat with me most of my life. As a child, my sister took me to the Museum of Modern Art, where the Guernica hung for so many years. You know that when Picasso finished the work, he refused to have it go to, Carol will probably tell you some of these things. Anyway, but he refused to hand the work over to the country of Spain because he said it should not go back to Spain till it's a democracy. And that didn't happen until the early 80s when the Guernica was returned to Spain. But as a child, my sister took me to see this work, and I was shocked by it. First time I saw it, I was 12 years old. And I looked at this thing. By the way, it's 11.5 foot by 25.5 foot, which is considerably longer than this, but we couldn't quite do it here. And I was astounded by it. And then every year, my sister would go back to the Modern, and every year, for 4 or 5 years, I saw this work. And then time passed, and you moved on to other things. And we, of course, have experienced many wars in our life, many tragedies in our lives here and personally. And when the opportunity came up to write a work for someone I consider a master, I broached this subject with him. But rather than me talking myself, I would like to invite one of the most brilliant pianists I have ever come across, and a man who's turned out to be a dear friend of mine, Kamal Gekic. Why don't you come up here? Stay here.
So,
Kamal, tell us how this came about, please.
sure. In 1999, I got a position at FIU School of Music, where Fred was dean, and soon after, in a festival, FIU Music Festival, I performed one of Fred's work, Metamorphosis. And talking about work and discussing possible future about collaborations, everything, he said, I would love to write concerto for you. There hasn't been a major concerto in many, many years. He said, no one would be happier than me. I'd be really pleased. And, we occasionally were bringing the subject in subsequent years. And, it wasn't moving much, I must say, until we're both busy. He did his Kaminami Rimon in Japan, with flamenco dancing. There were many, many projects. And so I was doing other things, a little bit more classical. And at some point, I noticed he became a little bit mischievously secretive. And he says, I'm doing something for you. I said, what is that? I'm actually writing concerto. I'm not waiting for anything anymore. And I was very pleased, and we discussed a little bit the form, because it's not easy to write today. There are many, many criteria how to write a piece of music. And there is, of course, Fred has found his style long ago. I favored something that had a recognizable form. I told him my preferences without trying to burden him, with all respect for creative inspiration that man can certainly feel. I told him that I believe there should be 3-movement work along classical lines, because they do exist for a reason. And I didn't talk about the theme, but my view of any kind of work is that preferably should work simultaneously on several levels. One of these levels is purely musical level, but it can work on emotional, intellectual level, it can work on a numerological level, it can work on a cultural level, it can work on many. More complex the work is, more meaning it has, the deeper it goes. And also, I wanted to have something like theme that is universal. And I mentioned to Fred, you already wrote Kaddish for orchestra, you wrote Lacrimose. Please, would you select something? He wrote Dance of Death. It's all these themes are universal. It's a theme of mourning or resurrection or joy or sadness, loss, everything. Would you write something? And then that was the last time I heard. I thought I've lost him, imposing too much. And then he said, it's going to be Guernica. And I was very happy about that. And then, of course, we met many times after that in a course of composing work. For example, second movement, I wanted to have a tune. I still believe that after all most incredible acrobatics of compositional virtuosity we experienced for past 100 years, there's something essential about 7 notes of a scale and a tune and a capability of touching the heart, if applied appropriately. It's never going to go out of fashion. And I told him, Fred, I would like to have a tune. And for the third, I don't want to talk too long about it, but for third movement, I wish to have something like a fugue, something complex, polyphonic, but also very tonally stable. It doesn't stop and go and move.
Okay, I'm going to cut you because you're going to give away my whole talk at the end.
Yeah, good.
It's interesting what he's saying, because the choice of Guernica in itself dictates how the music will be written. If you're looking for pretty music, you should leave now, because there's nothing pretty about the Guernica. As we see up here, it's an expression of misery and horror, and that first movement is all about the tragedy of Guernica. The second movement is called Mourning, as in sadness, and the last movement is a resurrection, not the religious aspect, but the joy of refinding things. But we'll get into that a little bit later. I will tell you this. We had the premiere of this work after, and I will also say to you, it's the hardest work I ever had to write. It was really a difficult piece to write, especially that first movement. But after you give it to someone like this, you find out you're not crazy, it really does work. And it was very exciting to have the work premiered in Prague. The premiere took place, could you give us a slide over here? Took place in the concert hall, the Smetana Concert Hall in Prague, Czech Republic. This is the entrance to the hall. It doesn't look like much from outside, but wait to see the inside. And over here you'll see the poster. One more, the poster is a little larger. You can see what the program was. Kamal did a short list piece, followed by my concerto. Then there was intermission, and then they did the Poems of Rome. And over here we see the inside of the concert hall. We were doing a read-through on the stage. You can see Kamal on the piano, and I was observing and literally thrilled to death. And here is a little better shot. Go on to the next one. This is unusual. Look at the statues over there. If any of you have ever gone to the Boston Hall, it's considered by many, the Boston Symphony Hall is one of the best concert halls in America, and many people believe it's because it has statues like that where the sound gets immersed in all the angles, and it helps the overtones as they come out. Next. Look at the ceiling. It was just to sit there, bathed in light that was coming in through these beautiful ceiling, and on the other side of it was a giant fresco. And the last one, but that was it.
That's probably
we had a full house. The reception to the piece was a composer's joy. 4 curtain calls, and it was terribly exciting. And then Kamal came out and played Chopin after that, because they wouldn't leave us. And it was just a wonderful experience, wouldn't you say?
Prague actually has a history of accepting Mozart's work, for example, Marriage of Figaro, among the others, when they failed in Vienna. And the reason we wanted to do it in Prague, because I was in good relationship with fantastic orchestra that you will later hear on the recording, which we did. And Prague has also a history of having many musical festivals. People are extremely unprejudiced, and that's a place to premiere the work in Europe, I would say.
It gives me pleasure now to invite someone up here who I've become very good friends with. She's done a remarkable job with this place, as you all know, and she's become a friend, and we've taken adventures together. We started a series here that was unusual because she's so open-minded. And I said to Carol, Carol, I want to do this project, but I'd like you to write something for the recording on Guernica. And she did. And then after that, we did an interview together that was on YouTube. But I need Carol to come up here and talk to you about why the Guernica took place. What was Picasso's influence here, and what influenced him, et cetera, et cetera. Ladies and gentlemen, Carol Damon.
And actually, before I begin talking about the painting, to give us a little bit about Spain, I'm very honored that Ana Zavia is here to represent the Consul General of Spain, Cristina Barrios, who has been such an amazing friend of the museum, especially through this Spanish year that we have been having in commemoration of Ponce de Leon's 500th anniversary since La Florida, since he arrived on the shores of La Florida. And so Ana, who is here this year because we have so many wonderful exhibits and programs about Spain, so she was brought here by Cristina Barrios from the Museum of the Americas in Madrid. And so I think it'd be very appropriate before I talk about the painting if she gives you a couple of minutes of the background. Ana.
Thank you very much, Carol. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is for me a great honor to be here with all of you in the name of the Consul General of Spain, Cristina Barrios. In the year that we celebrate 500 years of the landing of Juan Ponce de León in Florida, the Spanish consulate wants to say thank you to Carol Damian and to the French Museum for giving us the opportunity to speak about the Spanish painter Pablo Picasso and one of the most important paintings of the 20th century in Guernica. The Spanish consulate also wants to welcome the composer Frederick Kaufman. Congratulations for the Guernica piano concert and to the pianist Emma Guernica. To understand better the Guernica, I'm going to explain historical circumstances that happened in Spain in 1937. As you probably know, 1937 was the year when the Guernica was painted. But maybe the most significant meaning about the Guernica is that probably you are looking at one of the most important paintings of the 20th century. It is a painting that speaks to us always. Every generation has to understand the Guernica again. It is significant not only because of the historical circumstances that I am going to tell you of the Spanish Civil War. It is important because it's really a manifesto against all the war and against all the violence. The historical circumstances of the Guernica. In January 1937, Pablo Picasso was made responsible for painting a wall picture for the Spanish pavilion from the Paris World Fair by the Spanish Republican government. It should make people of the world aware of the situation that was happening in Spain during those days. Spain was in the Civil War. Picasso was thinking about the subject of his painting. He was prepared to paint a painting about the war yet. He didn't really know what he was going to paint. But however, on the 26th of April in 1937, the Spanish town of Guernica was bombed by the Nazi German Legion Condor, which was fighting together with Franco. The town, as you can see, was not of any strategic meaning at all, with no Republican troops being there. The bombardment was an attack of civilians and a symbol of destroying the center of Basque history and identification. The attack caused more than 1,600 lives and wounded 889 persons. It mostly affected old people, women, and children. The brutality of this action affected Picasso really very much. So he changed his initial plans of the painting and decided that Guernica would be the topic for his painting. The dominating colors are black, gray, and white. Like I said today. The right itself is not showing Guernica. Picasso doesn't paint any bombers, as you see any perpetrators. Instead of them, he paints the victims of the war. The depicted space is filled with dead, injured, dismembered, and torn bodies. The points of intersection of simply uncoordinated lines, which are spread all over the paintings, become templates of explosions. They block up the whole of the picture. Nevertheless, many things remain a puzzle. The meaning of the bull, for example, on the left, it can be understood as a symbol for the brutality of the attack. Even the collective learning of the art historian has not been able to solve these questions. It's an open painting. It has a universal meaning. Although, as you probably know, the painting belonged to the Spanish government, Picasso didn't want that the painting will come to Spain until the end of Franco's dictatorship. And this was a condition for exhibiting the picture in Spain. When Franco died and Spain has a democracy, the Guernica was brought from New York, where the painting was, to Madrid. And now the painting is at the Reina Sofia Museum, where you can visit it.
You know, we didn't even rehearse that, but those are my sons. So she actually was thinking what I was thinking, and it worked out perfectly because there's a little bit of the Spanish background. And so very briefly, just to kind of put it into context, art historical context, how Picasso not only created this work, this great tragic picture of horror, but also, as Anna said, it's a very open-ended painting. There are no real answers. If you go through the painting and you say, well, the bull represents this, the horse represents this, it isn't necessarily so. He wanted the viewer to almost come to their own conclusions, because the conclusions are always the same. It's horrible. It's really a tragedy. So he did create the painting so that it does seem to be in three parts, like a triptych, like an altarpiece, each part representing the horrors of this particular time. I wanted to show you this just so that you get an idea of the size of it at the Reina Sofia. That it is 25 feet long, and it's a very confrontational work. You can't help but be moved by it. As you know, he used his facility, his artistic facility, his technical facility as a cubist. And by that I mean he had the ability to take something apart, deconstruct it, reconstruct it, very flat from multiple points of view. And that's really the essence of Cubism. And that was only one part of the very active art history that involves Picasso. He also used tones of gray and the recreation of like newsprint, because this was news. He wanted to blast this news just like it was a newspaper to the world about what had happened. So that is the idea of the gray tones and the newsprint, not to mention the gray tones are also the tones of mourning. So the horse, is it the betrayed innocence of Spanish Republic and the people? Is the bull either Franco or Spain? Does the bull represent stupid bullies? You can interpret this the way you want to interpret it, because either way, it is a very sad situation. So here are just a couple of the details. And the electric light that is so prominent in the painting as well is meant to reveal the event in all its horrors, to really awaken the world to what had happened with this extraordinary event. And I think this detail shows you how Picasso painted the gray tone so it does look like newsprint. Obviously greatly exaggerated because the painting is so very big, so it's not a collage with newsprint. So with that, just a couple of other things that I thought you might find about it, to end with this quote of that during World War II, when a Nazi general approached Picasso with a print and said, "Did you do this?" And he responded, "No, you did that." So with that, I turn it back to Frank.
Thank you, Paul. Now, with those thoughts in mind, I set about to write a piece of music. Not a pretty piece of music, but I felt something that had to be said in the language that I was most comfortable doing it. I hate long concertos where you hear the orchestra for 10 minutes before the piano comes in, when it's all about the piano. So I wrote a demanding, driving, militaristic opening for the piano. Would you play the very
Sure.
beginning of that for them?
So just to say a word, I will not only play piano parts, but I'll play some orchestral parts as well to highlight some of transitions. And we will not go through whole piece because that would take too long time. We would like to touch characteristic spots, and after which we'll play recording, which is for practical reason better usable here. On premiere, it was performed from memory. However, because of alignment and orientation, it's better to use a score today. Anyway, this is the opening cadenza, which is quite unusual.
Now that leads into a suspended section where I've taken the strings. Normally, a string section has 5 parts to it. First and second violin, viola, cello, and string bass. I've subdivided the string section into 14 parts, and each instrument plays its own part. My music normally is quite contrapuntal, and this gave me that opportunity to play with suspended sounds. Some people have heard it, say they hear they feel the sky, they feel the bombs starting to drop. And I won't say to you I thought that way, but I wanted this contrast between the opening thing. Now I take that theme and I start to chop it up. You just heard it, a segment of it. Now I'm going to do the same thing with 2 hands on the piano.
Yeah, that actually shows one of your other influences, which is jazz. I would mention 2 hands separate are characteristic of Oscar Peterson, very great jazz pianist, who
Yes.
we both admire. And just to say, to see what it is about, I would just play a couple of notes. Let's say. Something like that. That's a jazz part. Now, this is Fred's take on this part.
Well, then I take that section and start to expand it. So we now have the part for 2 hands, now expanded with more accents appearing, shifting accents in both hands. Which leads now into the strings, that subdivided string section with 4 viola parts, first, second, third, fourth, each one playing something else. 4 cello parts, 2 first violin, 2 second violin, and 2 bass parts. And you'll hear, not necessarily on the piano, but you'll hear glissandos. A glissando is like a falling sound. It's one of the characteristics of my writing. I like to use glissandos. In this piece, it took on another meaning. And when we get to the end of the third movement, you'll hear the whole orchestra playing glissandos one after another, just setting about. When you do a work like this, you can't depend on one theme. Well, I wrote another theme, the second theme on the piano. Would you play that at section, what is that, section E? The interplay starts to take place about this point. And by the way, after I discuss each movement, I'll play the recording of that movement for you. So everything you've heard will start to come together for you. I use the piano, of course, as the solo instrument. Sometimes I use the piano as an instrument within the orchestra. There's a section in here where a flute solo appears, first flute solo, and it becomes quite important. It's picked up by the piano, and eventually throughout this movement, we expand on this theme. That's first flute, imitated by the piano. One rhythm I use quite a bit, which happens on page 6, number 29, is a rhythm of do-da-da, do-da. It's a jazz feeling rhythm. Would you just...
I have a lot of that in the case, or this part.
Yes, I use that long, short, do-da, do-da. It's directly derived from a jazz feeling. That one has my own background. I started out as a jazz trumpet player with Woody Herman's band. So that never quite left me, and jazz has always been an integral part of my writing, although I won't say it's dominant, it's there. I make extensive use of the timpani in this piece, so much so that the timpanist came up to me and hugged me at the end of the rehearsal. He said, "Bless you." I said, "What are you blessing me for?" He said, "Nobody writes a solo for timpani. You wrote so many of them that I'm ecstatic." Well, you know, it's a funny story because after we did the concert, the next day we did the recording session, and 2 days later, another orchestra in Prague recorded another work of mine, Seascape. And I came to that recording session, and there was the percussionist. I said, "But I didn't write a percussion part." He said, "I had such a good time at that concert, I decided to come and play for you for nothing." So anyway, I used the timpani quite a bit, solo passages, as a way of getting from one section to another section. And do you want to play
We can only drum here.
Yeah, it's written for quite a bit of 4 timpanis. We could have done it probably with 2 or 3, because nowadays they have pedals and you could change the pitch. But I didn't want that. I wanted the pure sound of each timpani in
The
itself.
biggest approximation we could come is the bass register of this the roll. It sounds better for the original instrument, though.
Yeah, you'll hear it. You can't miss the timpani. One of the characteristics of my writing is using rhythms, multi-rhythms. 3 against 4, 4 against 5, 5 against 6. In my Catalans, in my last string quartet, I used urban string quartet. I used 4 against 5 against 6 against 7. Now, what does that do? That gives you, it's not chaos, but it gives you a feeling of anxiety and movement. Could you demonstrate
we're going to telescope some of this. First, this is in unison. 4. This is 4. 1, 2, 3, but this is 3. Then 3 against 5. 5. 3. 5. Of course, it goes at quite a clip. And again, same thing in scales. 4, 6. In upper part, 6, 5. And we move it at this speed. It goes quite fast. Of course, they could align, technically speaking. They should actually be in the same key. But Fred writes them this way. And that actually reflects this inner and outer turmoil of dissonance and being torn and broken. So we play all of them.
Now, you'll hear the entire orchestra doing this. You'll hear a run coming up from one group, a 4 against 5 rhythm with another group, the piano fighting against all of that. Well, it's war. It's chaos. Now, we get to the very last section. I felt I had to return the theme that we heard at the very beginning. This time, I take all the strings and they're playing pizzicato, boom, 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 which gives it a driving effect to the end. I'd like now to play for you the first movement, and I'll let you hear what it sounds like with the Czech National Symphony Orchestra, Kamal Gekic on piano. First movement only. Suspended strings. Abbreviated version of the first theme. Two hands. Strings again. A little bit longer. Introducing now, we had violas, now we have violas and cellos coming in. It's in this section now with the strings that I'm going to start introducing some glissandos, sort of falling off these feelings amongst the strings. hear them at the end of the phrases. Now we introduce the second theme, which I was looking for something that would be different in its feeling than the driving energy of the first one. He just picked up the flute melody. Now we're modifying the second theme slightly. Timpani solos. Left hand, seconds, right hand, the theme that appeared in the orchestra. Almost a 12-tone feeling. Pizzicato in the bass. Here we have the piano and the marimba doing a duet. Up. So I brought back the quiet sounds again, spatial sounds, a little more complex this time, with all the strings in there. Against flutes in the upper voices. Piano. Now I bring back that original driving melody with the basses on the bottom. it's at this point where all hell breaks loose. You're going to have snap pitches in the string, scale-like passages in the winds and the brass being thrown back and forth, and the piano, of course, carrying on his own thing of seconds. We're back at the end now. That same passage with the whole string section in pizzicato. Well, that's the end of the first movement. Now, I knew when, thank you. You know, it's nice to know that no matter what you write, he could play it. So that was good. Second movement. I knew that you can't go on for 23 minutes and have that kind of a cacophony of sound coming at you. And also, in the real experience, when it was over, there was a terrible feeling of mourning there. And so I decided that at this point, a little beautiful music, a little bit of prayer type of music, a sweep of the orchestra followed by almost an Eastern European chant, melodic chant that appears in the winds, followed by the piano into a long melody. He had asked me to write a long melody, and here it occurs. Bass clarinet in the bottom of its register plays. And always coming back to, and now starts the main theme for the piano. Winds. Bum ba dum, bum ba dum, bum ba dum. That oboe part is going to recur throughout this movement, and the whole piece ends, the second movement, on that oboe solo transcribed for the piano. Now behind all of this, that's sort of fun. Now, on this, you're going to hear gentle strings, and it moves on like this. The form of this movement is A, which was that sweeping sound, that chant-like music, developed a little bit, and then we have, like we do in life, a recurrence of tragedies and anxieties. Well, in this movement, I bring back that feeling of a little bit of that feeling of horror, which occurs in the middle of the second movement. And we hear ourselves leading in with a series of scales that bring us into the orchestra playing bum, 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 followed by runs for the piano. Yeah, and then above that, you're going to hear timpani. Of course, he's trying to play the whole orchestra for you. It was a 65-piece orchestra, and only Kamal could do that. Anyway, we end off this section with a series of whole tone scales and other type of scales, all happening into the piano, which leads us to the end of this section. And then an oboe plays. And now we have a recapitulation back to the beginning, with the orchestra doing the sweep up again, followed by the theme in the piano. Well, he's winding it down now. The second movement is winding down. And it's a return to that gentle, da, 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 that feeling, which comes back in the orchestra. And we culminate the movement with that same pitch. Here's the piano part at the very end. That was that oboe thing we heard earlier on. Well, now let's listen to it live. Hopefully.
It's not missing.
Let me do that again because I cut off the sweep. Middle Eastern type of, almost Hebraic, a chant. Imitated by the piano. Bass clarinet, listen to the bottom. Isn't that a wonderful sound, the bass clarinet? That's the bottom of its register. Bassoon. And now, the man asked me for a melody. I gave him a long melody.
Thank you, Fred.
You're welcome. Now listen for the oboe part, that important note. Which we end the movement on. Again, pyramid writing in the strings. I almost wanted a string quartet feeling behind the piano. Now we're starting to get some movement in the orchestra, which runs back and forth amongst the winds. And now we get that percussive feeling. I changed to piccolo on top. Back to that percussive sound again. The run. This time with the winds. Lots of runs all the way up to the top. Oboe. That same theme coming back. The orchestral sweep again. Followed by the solo. Modified. Bass clarinet. In come the violas now. Again with that oboe solo, repeated constantly. The chanting, da 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 da. Again, pyramid writing in the strings all the way up from the bottom. Bring back that, I like that. Da 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 da. Brought it back. The piano down to the bottom. Bass. Now the flute's going to pick it up. And now we fade the whole movement out very gently with the piano. Same theme. That's that one. Thank you. Thank you. Well, now we end the piece, Resurrection. And I wanted to shake up the audience. I mean, here they were, everyone's placid in a wonderful mood right now, but that's not my character. I can't leave it like that. So I play the end into the clusters that you're going to play afterwards with the percussion.
Right.
Here's the end of this segment. It's what I call a taka, which means attached, no break. Like you, people were smiling and feeling very nice. Then I shook them up. And then timpani, boom. But it doesn't stop there. Now we get into the thrust of the work, which is a rhythm. This movement is all about rhythm. For this, I use the flamenco rhythm throughout, and that's the basis of the work, is rhythm. And here we have, could you play the string part?
Yeah, we can play.
And now I do a return of a melody that appeared in the first movement. And the runs we heard in the second movement after the percussion. And then it goes on, and it goes on with lots of string percussion. I wrote a piece called Caminarimon for flamenco dance and taiko drums. And who can you steal from if you can't steal from yourself? So I took that rhythm and I put it into the strings. Anyway, at this point, I knew we needed a theme. And I didn't want a long theme, so we did a short theme for the piano, section D. Answered by the string, digga-digga-dup. Yeah, as a jazz rhythm, do-dup, which I like a lot, and so I give it to him a lot. But you do that one. That's it. Okay, and now Kamal said to me, he calls me up, I'll never forget this. He calls me up and he says, Fred, give me a fugue. I give him a fugue in a piece like this. So, tongue-in-cheek, I did a little Mozart for him, and then went on from there. We're going to play that little part for him.
So it's a part.
Now. Get out of it real quick. And, thank you. And he looked at me and said, I knew what you did. And it was a lot of fun. Anyway, we get the strings coming back into the do-dup. We have a lot of that flamenco rhythm coming back. It doesn't stop. There's a section in M, which I'm not going to ask him to attempt on the piano, but the orchestra and strings play, all the way down to the bottom. And this orchestra was so great. They nailed it the first time. I never believed anyone could play it. No less nailed it right away. And that's answered by screaming brass. Really, almost jazz phrases. And you'll hear it. And then after all of this movement, we got to a quieter part because I felt that was necessary. And slowly we get back and we're moving towards the end of the piece. Well, folks, you don't end a piece like this going to sleep. You end a piece like this with lots of energy, which is what I did. First thing I did was use tone clusters. Would you play a cluster for them?
Cluster is
Yeah, now, so what you're going to hear, he's going to play a section now, which is all tone clusters with the right hand. It's just a series of notes. I gave him the rhythm, he played all the notes. And underneath that, the strings are playing back and forth, and it all builds. It builds to a crazy, wild ending where all hell breaks loose, and that's the end of the piece. You want to play the end of it for them? Here it is. Well, I want to do the, wait. I cheated here. Isn't he wonderful? So gentle. Gentler section now. And yet a little mysterious. Back comes in the orchestra. building. You can't stand it anymore. And that's it.
Bravo.
Thank you very much. Okay.
I will be your agent.
Oh,
His CD on sale downstairs, and Fred will sign it for you. And maybe Al and I will sign it too.
They'll both
because
sign
we
it.
have- We'll all sign it.
and part of the proceeds goes back to the art museum. This is the time for you to take pot shots at me. So, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer it, or Kamal, or Carol, who actually wrote the preamble in that recording. So, yes.
So there isn't the resurrection or the memorial in the painting. So you're thinking of this as now a triptych, your own triptych in music, inspired by the experience of the great painting, right?
Yes, I did.
It works very much on that level, I think, because it is a unified work too. They're not separate.
That's right.
That's what you're thinking about.
Yes, I was. Thank you. Yes. Any other questions? Don't be bashful. Anything you want.
There is some in the back.
Yes.
Can you talk about a little bit more just about the collaborative process between the two of you in creating this piece? Kamal, if you could talk a little bit about what interested you in Fred's music as a pianist, and Fred, how you tailored, if you did, the solo parts for Kamal's specific abilities.
Before we answer the question, I want you to know that's Maestro Andrew Bazance of the Florida Grand Opera, who is now doing his own thing back there.
Good to see you. Yeah. Well, at the point when Concerto was written, Fred knew me for how many years?
5 years. 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, maybe even more.
More,
So we kind of knew each other pretty well, and he was in many of my concerts. He knew how I play and what I play, and I knew him as well. I knew a number of his works. My still favorite works, he disagrees with me, but my favorite work of him is Lacrimose. And I told him, look, if you ever write something for me, I would like a combination of Lacrimose and maybe Kaddish and maybe a little bit Dance of Death, but something, as I mentioned earlier, on multiple levels. I didn't have any idea that he would come up with Guernica story. You know, at the point where I came in 1999 to United States, that was a NATO intervention in my country, which was the first major intervention in Europe after Second World War. And for me, it is symbolic, and it had a personal significance. I mean, a piece on this level, it speaks to all people. Everyone throughout history experienced, if they live long enough, everyone experiences something like that, and it's universal. So it's extremely, how should I say, theme that is never old. It always is today's theme, unfortunately to say. Now, about piano writing, I did like jazz references very much, particularly because we do share passion for and respect for Oscar Peterson, a great jazz player. And,
Who started out as a classical player.
Yeah, actually most of jazz players were classical players, like he started, and Keith Jarrett, for example.
Yes.
And Fred was, of course, a brass player, if I'm not wrong, and jazz player.
And a terrible pianist.
So we did go through the piece many times, not so much. I wanted him to have absolutely free hands. We're just discussing what would sound better. I will give you a little example. For example, he wrote very simple cluster at the end. And I wasn't quite convinced that that is what works. He said, well, play whatever you want there. And I told him, well, how would you like me if I play a major cluster with my elbows? That's going to take more notes for it. And he completely agreed with that. So this kind of thing. We did a lot of collaboration in the process.
You know, I must tell you, some of the best things happen in music in circumstance like this. I think of Rhapsody in Blue, when the orchestra was rehearsing so much that they were all going nuts, and George Gershwin went in back to talk with someone. I think it was Paul Whiteman who was conducting at that time.
Right.
And to talk to Paul Whiteman about it. And the first clarinet player picked up his clarinet, his name was Gorman, and went, and that's how that part came about. So these things happen, and his doing the full clusters, it's now integrated into the piece.
There were many details, but it will be too long time now to go. Anyway, we worked on it for quite a bit.
Yeah, it took me around 7 or 8 months to write the work, and the next major performance that I know of, we're negotiating with a couple orchestras right now for other performances in the States. The North American premiere will be on August 30th with the Puerto Rican Symphony Orchestra. I'm excited about that. That was the old orchestra of, what was his name, the great cellist? Casals Orchestra.
Right.
So excited about that, and hopefully we'll get Andrew Bazance to do one performance and some other orchestras around. Anyway, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Bravo. Yeah, bravo. Good time was it?